The mother stood by the milk shelf, tired but determined, choosing products for dinner. The children ran around, whispering and laughing, creating the atmosphere of a home she so missed these days. She felt relief. She had gathered them all and could even allow herself a small pleasure, a walk through the store. It seemed like simple happiness, just being together without thinking about worries. In her mind, she briefly thought how good it was that all the children were healthy and there would be enough food for dinner. But then something changed. The supermarket entrance door slammed open and several teenagers in black masks rushed in. They paid no attention to other shoppers. Their footsteps echoed through the hall. One of them jumped toward the children and threateningly began demanding money. The mother felt her heart freeze. She felt her throat tighten. These teenagers were serious. She took a step toward them, trying to calm the children, but her legs wouldn't obey. The fear she had long tried to hide filled her chest. What to do? How to protect her children in this madness? The mother stood, not knowing what to do. Fear engulfed her, but she could not afford to panic. The hooligans stood right in front of her children. One held a bat, another wore a cruel smirk, and a third looked around the scene maliciously, as if expecting her to do something. The mother didn't know what exactly. She felt her muscles tense and her mind shut down. It seemed all her actions slowed down. Everything around disappeared. The supermarket, the shelves with groceries, the noise of the checkouts. Only she and these threats remained. She tried to look at the children, but their eyes, full of fear, gave her no peace. How could she allow these people to threaten them? What if they decided to take a step forward? She stood between them and the children, her body tense. But what to do next? Stand still, stay silent, or rush into the fight? It was unclear what tormented her more, fear for the children or fear for herself. She wanted to protect them, but was she capable? Fear paralyzed her, and at that moment, she realized she simply could do nothing. She felt helpless, and this feeling struck deeply at her confidence. Her thoughts jumped from one option to another. What if she started shouting or doing something? But what if that provoked them? What if they became even more aggressive? She was afraid of being the cause of her children falling into even greater danger. But how could she just stand and do nothing? Panic began to build. The mother tried to focus, but her thoughts tangled. Why was she hesitating? Why couldn't she just stand up and protect her children? The fear for them overwhelmed her, but she knew she still had to act. She could not let these teenagers win. As a mother, she had to be the shield for her children, no matter how terrible the threat. She looked at the children. They tried to stay calm, but their faces clearly showed anxiety. She understood that if she did nothing, it would not only harm her image, but also put their lives at risk. Different courses of action spun through her mind. But she knew one thing. Now that the hooligans were already close to them, she had no choice. The anger that began creeping into her consciousness was not directed at the children or the situation. It was aimed at those hooligans who had taken control. The mother felt her hand clench into a fist. Her body was not yet ready to act, but inside everything had changed. Suddenly, something inside her shifted. Everything tightened, and fear turned into determination. If I don't stop them now, they will do whatever they want to the children, she told herself silently. Suddenly, she realized she should not be afraid. Everything was on the edge, but she decided to act. No matter how aggressive they were, no matter what they could do. If she had to fight, she would. The mother took the first step forward. Her mind was quiet. In that moment, she was simply a mother, ready to protect her children. She looked into their frightened eyes and stepped again, toward the teenagers with the bats. The hooligans noticed her movement and froze for a moment, but she did not stop. She took another step. There was no time for doubts now. She understood that if they took another step, her children would have to face this threat. She was about to shout, but instead clenched her fist even tighter. I will not back down, she thought. When the hooligan with the bat stepped toward her, the mother felt her body tense. She couldn't just stand and watch him threaten her children. At the moment his hand raised the bat, she stepped toward him. This was her chance. The moment she could step forward and show she would not wait. "Step back," she shouted as loudly as she could, but her voice was firm, without panic. She did not allow herself to falter. The hooligan with the bat slowed, hesitated, but stayed in place. Everything around was tense. How would he react to her shout? He did not expect such a turn, and his confidence began to crack. He paused, but at that moment, as he stopped, she stepped toward him. His gaze shifted from her face to the bat in his hand. She stood right in front of him, looking into his eyes. The hooligans noticeably retreated, but one was not going to give up so easily. He clenched his fists and stepped forward, gripping the bat so tightly that its wooden shaft threatened not only her, but also her children. He wore the same face full of contempt. His look was a clear threat. The mother could no longer hold back the anger growing inside her. She was no longer afraid. This teenager was her threat, and now she knew the only way to win was to fight back. "I will not back down," she shouted again, and that cry became her strength. The hooligan froze. There was uncertainty in his eyes. The supermarket door slammed open with such a crash that all eyes instantly turned toward it. At that moment, when the mother was ready to face the hooligan head-on, a man appeared in the store. He entered as calmly as if this chaos was an ordinary affair for him. The mother held her breath. He was tall, with a confident stride, and most importantly, with a clear and calm gaze that immediately drew attention. There was no fear or hesitation in his eyes. He seemed ready to face the world head-on. The mother didn't have time to understand who he was, but his presence instantly changed the atmosphere. It seemed the air became lighter, and the tension in the supermarket eased slightly. The hooligans noticed him simultaneously, but one of them, who was closest, still held the bat. He raised it as if about to strike, but when his gaze met the stranger's confident eyes, he suddenly hesitated. This was not what he expected to see. The mother couldn't believe her eyes. She didn't know who this man was, but there was strength in his confidence. She felt her body relax slightly. This moment felt like a miracle, as if someone had intervened to help her. But who was he? The man continued to look at the hooligan holding the bat. He made no unnecessary movements, but his gaze was so commanding that everything around seemed insignificant. The hooligan, who had tried to threaten, didn't know what to do. He had tried several times to raise the bat, but each time his hand began to tremble. The man, as if assessing the situation, simply stood his ground, and this only increased the tension. Unable to stand aside any longer, the mother stepped toward the children. Now she felt her resolve returning, but she no longer needed to act. The man standing before the hooligans was ready to intervene himself. She heard him calmly say, "Step away from the children." His voice was steady, confident, without the slightest hesitation, as if there was no threat in what he said. He was ready to stand up for them. The mother realized that not only were her children now protected, but her own strength no longer depended on the situation. The man's gaze was a source of confidence. He needed no weapon or cruelty. He was strength itself. The man did not move. He stood as if nothing happening could affect him. It was a strange feeling. The outside world with its noise and aggression seemed to cease to exist for him. He simply stared at the teenager, who again raised the bat, intending to strike. The mother felt her own determination grow stronger. She could no longer stand aside, but suddenly the man stepped forward. It was a slow, confident step, without fear or hatred. He simply moved forward as if knowing exactly what he had to do. The teenager raising the bat froze. His gaze slid over the man's figure. Doubt crept in. At that moment, it was clear the man was not afraid of his strike. And in the next instant, when the teenager again tried to raise the bat, the man grabbed it with a lightning-fast reflex that few could have predicted. He wrenched the bat from the teenager's hands so quickly that the boy didn't even realize what had happened. The mother was stunned. Everything happened in a fraction of a second, and the hooligans began to step back. The teenager started retreating, but one remained. His face was full of determination, but fear was clearly visible in his eyes. He didn't want to back down, but didn't know how to deal with the man who had easily defeated his friend. He stood still, seemingly deciding what to do next. Noticing his hesitation, the man said, "Don't make me repeat myself." It was said so calmly, but there was something in his voice that made the teenager finally retreat. He quickly turned and ran after his companions, not saying another word. The man continued to stand, watching the direction of the doors until the teenagers disappeared. All 5 of them, who just a minute ago had threatened the children, were now leaving the store without any intention to resist. The mother stood frozen. Everything had happened so fast that she couldn't believe what had just occurred. Who was this man? She looked at the man who had saved her children. He hadn't said a single unnecessary word, but his actions spoke for themselves. The mother stood and looked at Jason, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Everything was so fast and unexpected that she still couldn't believe her eyes. He stood nearby, calm, as if nothing had happened. His face showed no emotion, but something in his gaze made her feel that he was in control of the situation, even though everything around seemed chaotic. The children also stood unsure of what to do. The mother hugged them, trying to restore a little calm to their hearts. But this moment lingered within her. Her mind was filled with questions. Who was he? Why was he here at that moment? He was not an ordinary man. Everything about his behavior, his presence, it all said he was ready to face any threat. But why did he intervene? It seemed too coincidental. The man slowly turned to her and, as if sensing her question, said, "Are you okay?" His voice was calm, but there was something in it that made her feel he genuinely cared about her condition. She nodded, but couldn't utter a word. She felt her voice was gone. The situation that just moments ago was a threat to her life and the lives of her children now seemed like a distant nightmare. But she could not forget what had happened. Why was he here? Who was he? Jason looked at her with such attentiveness that it seemed he could read her thoughts. His gaze was calm, but there was something in it that made her nervous, as if he knew she was not only worried about the hooligans, but also about what had happened when he intervened. He was not just a random hero, he was something more. "Don't worry, everything will be fine," he said, and there seemed to be no hint of insincerity in his words. Yet the mother still couldn't understand exactly what he meant. She turned to the children, trying to hide her inner discomfort. The children still couldn't fully comprehend what had happened, but their eyes, full of gratitude, spoke louder than words. She knew they felt safe, but that safety came not only from the fact that the hooligans had left, but also from the presence of this man. No matter how much she tried, she couldn't explain this feeling to herself. "Who are you?" she finally dared to ask, feeling she could no longer hide her doubts. Jason looked at her, then at the children, and back to her eyes. He didn't seem like a threat or a protector in the usual sense. He was somewhere in between. "I'm Jason," he said, his voice steady and confident. He said nothing more, as if that was enough for him. The mother felt her heart quicken once again. She tried to understand what lay behind that answer, what he was trying to hide. Why didn't he say more? Why didn't he explain what had brought him here? Why he intervened at that exact moment? She felt some of her tension ease. He was here, and that was what mattered most. But still, why him? And why then? "Did you work with the police?" she asked cautiously, hoping the answer would clarify the situation. Jason looked at her, and a shadow of doubt flickered across his face. "No," he said, "I don't work with the police." The mother felt her mind start to race, trying to find an explanation for what had happened. Who was this man? Why was he so calm? Why intervene if he wasn't connected to law enforcement? The question tormented her. But when she looked again at his face, she felt this was no ordinary intervention. He was more than a random passerby who just decided to help. The mother felt her impatience growing. She could no longer remain silent. Why was he here? Why hadn't he just left when it was over? She addressed him directly. "Who are you, Jason? What are you really doing here?" Her voice was firm, though she knew her questions might sound somewhat blunt. But she had to know the truth. Her life, her children's lives, had at some point depended on this man. And now, with the threat gone, she couldn't afford to ignore what had happened. This man knew what to do, knew how to handle the situation, but why was he willing to help her? Jason looked at her without haste and raised an eyebrow slightly. He didn't seem surprised by her questions. On the contrary, he seemed to have been expecting them. "You want to know who I am?" he asked. "I'm not just a passerby," Jason said, stepping forward a little. His voice was calm, but there was a hidden weight to it. "I work with people who handle situations like these." The mother felt her heart start to beat faster. Who was this man? He clearly wasn't just some ordinary person off the street. He knew what to do in dangerous situations. His words were direct but did not reveal all the details. "Do you work with the police?" she asked, trying to clarify his role. Jason shook his head but did not answer immediately. He seemed to choose his words carefully. "I work with those who can't rely on the police," he said, and his words sounded like an answer to a question she hadn't even voiced aloud. She felt her own doubts begin to dissolve. His words opened a window to another reality. The mother stood listening to Jason, realizing her life would never be the same. These words changed her perception of reality. She was an ordinary woman, a mother of 3 children, and now it seemed her world had collided with something much larger. This entire situation, her encounter with Jason, felt anything but random. "What do you mean?" she asked almost in a whisper. She was ready to learn the truth, even if it meant her life would never be the same again. This man, Jason, was now part of her world, and she wanted to understand why. Jason stepped forward. He lifted his head as if deciding what would come next. "What happened today is just the beginning," he said. "But you need to be ready for what comes next." After Jason's words, the mother felt her world shift. What had seemed like a random intervention was now part of something much bigger. She stood before him, feeling the rising anxiety wrestle with curiosity. Her life, which had just seemed ordinary, was now, in some sense, stained with a mystery she couldn't comprehend. What did he mean by "be ready for what comes next"? What was he implying? "What kind of people can't rely on the police?" she asked, her voice more determined now. She knew she had to get an answer. This was no longer a matter of curiosity, but a matter of survival. She couldn't afford not to understand what was happening. Jason looked at her, his gaze calm as always, but a shadow of understanding flickered in his eyes. He knew her questions were inevitable. He seemed ready to share what he had been hiding. "There are people who live in situations where even the police can't help," he answered quietly. "Not because they don't want to, but because other laws apply to them. In their world, there are only those who can survive and those who can't. I help those who were left in the shadows when everyone else turned away." His words sounded like a cold reality she never thought she'd face. At that moment, she realized her life might never be the same again. The mother still stood there, trying to process what she had heard. Was she truly ready to step into this world? A world she knew nothing about except that it was dark, cruel, and dangerous? She had faced enough threats in her life to understand that help isn't always guaranteed. But who were these people that even those sworn to protect couldn't help? "And how do you help these people?" she asked, her voice betraying her anxiety. Jason thought for a moment before replying. He was as calm as ever, but a spark of understanding appeared in his eyes. "Sometimes it requires strength, sometimes shadows, but always a price. The price of safety, the chance to breathe without fear at night. The people I help can't always return to the normal world, but I give them a chance. She understood the question wasn't about returning, it was about surviving. This wasn't salvation, it was a reminder that life might not give second chances. This wasn't just an intervention. It was an intervention in their world, a world with no place for the weak. And suddenly she realized she might have become part of that world. Only hours ago, her life had revolved around her children, her family, keeping them safe. The mother felt her body tighten. This information changed her perspective. She couldn't just let it go. Her mind kept racing, but her heart feared what she might learn next. Fear gripped her chest. "But what does this mean for me?" she asked, unable to hide her worry. "I am a mother. I can't just abandon my children and plunge into the unknown. What will happen to them if I end up in this world?" She paused, trying to gather her thoughts. "I can't risk their safety." Jason stood with a serious look. "It's your choice," he said. "But remember, you won't be the only one taking risks. We all live in a world where there are only two paths, fight or surrender. And if you stand aside, you won't be able to protect your children because there's already a threat to them. Not because of me, but because of this world you live in." Her thoughts turned again to her children. She couldn't just step into this new world without knowing how it would affect their future. But her anxiety didn't ease. He was right. Even in the safety she believed in, they were still at risk. She couldn't forget how, at that moment when everything happened, she was powerless to help. She didn't know what to do, but her instincts told her a choice had to be made. He was already beyond the threshold. He didn't give her time to hesitate. She knew she had to make a decision. All this time, she could have brushed off everything that was happening, but now, her life, her children's lives, were tied to this world. Whatever choice she made, she felt she could never return to the world she once knew. And this new world wasn't just about survival. It was about making a choice. Jason looked at her, understanding her doubts but not judging them. He knew she had to make the decision herself. He wasn't going to force her. He simply waited for her to choose on her own. "You'll decide when you're ready," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But remember, I will always be here if you want to walk this path." She hugged her children, trying to hide her anxiety. It was more than just a choice. It was a new world she had to enter. But the question remained. If she took this step, how would it affect her family? The mother stood before a choice that drained her strength. She couldn't just come to a decision lightly because every action now affected not only her, but her children. She looked at them. They still didn't understand the full scale of what was happening. Their eyes only reflected gratitude and mild surprise. They were safe, and she couldn't let that safety be destroyed. "Do you understand that this isn't just a choice?" she said, addressing Jason. She tried to grasp what would happen to them if she decided to enter this world. This new world was dangerous, unfamiliar, and she didn't know how it would change her life. "I can't just leave everything behind. I can't simply forget that I have children. How will this all affect their future?" Jason stood calmly, watching her. He didn't try to give advice, didn't tell her what to do. He knew this choice had to be hers alone. His eyes remained steady and understanding, but he said no more. "Do you think you can return to what was before?" he asked. His question was less about her decision and more about what she herself thought. He knew it was important for her to understand if she could go back to her old life once everything changed. The mother realized that this moment was truly decisive. Everything she once considered important and stable now seemed fragile and vulnerable. She couldn't stay in ignorance, but she knew that if she stepped into this world, she would be giving up everything she had known. The safety of her children would come at a price, and that price could be high. "You're offering me a new life," she said, trying to clarify what she felt. "But what kind of life is that? I don't want my children to end up in the place you're talking about." I don't want them to be part of a world where you have to fight, where you can't always count on help." Jason listened without interrupting, and his gaze softened. "You're not obligated to take my path," he replied. "But I know you don't want to risk their future, and I can help if you're ready." She felt her chest tighten at his words. He was right. She couldn't just stand aside. The world she was now entering was not just about survival. It was about the choice she had to make for the sake of those she loved. With this new understanding, the mother felt her body begin to respond to the new world. Her nerves, which had been tense before, started to ease. She couldn't quite grasp what exactly drew her. Perhaps everything, protecting her children and the desire not to be powerless. Her life was no longer what it had been. She felt that time had ceased to be her ally. "What should I do?" she asked Jason. Her question carried more than just worry. It was a cry for help, a plea for guidance on how to move forward. Noticing her desperation, Jason stepped a little closer but did not cross the boundary. He knew this moment was important, not only for her but for him as well. He wasn't trying to impose his choice, but his words mattered. "You've already taken the first step. You can't go back to the old way, but you can choose how to move forward." He spoke with such confidence that the mother felt her trust in him grow. Jason was not just a random passerby. He was someone who knew what needed to be done, someone who did not let fear control him. He was offering her more than help. He was offering a path that could change everything. The mother stood in this uncertain space between two worlds. The old world with its safety and routines was behind her. The new world she had to enter was full of risk and uncertainty, but she knew she could no longer stand still. She had already made a choice, even if she hadn't fully realized it. "I'm ready," she said, and in her voice was not only determination but awareness. This was not only her step, it was a step for her children, for their safety, for a world where there would be no place for threats or danger. Jason nodded, and there was understanding in his eyes. He knew everything would be different now. This new path would be full of trials, but she couldn't go back. "Then we go together," he said. The mother stood before a new world she had just chosen for herself and her children. Everything that had happened in her life seemed divided into two parts, before and after meeting Jason. She couldn't quite tell what she needed from all this, or what would be right. But now there was no turning back. She had made her choice. Jason, as always, remained calm. He was the kind of person who could not only understand her doubts, but become a guiding star in this chaos. He had become her ally, and even more, her mentor. His demeanor left no doubt. He knew what to do, and his words were her key to a new reality. But what kind of reality was this, and how would she live with it? "Are you ready?" he asked as they walked down an empty alley. He said it calmly, without a hint of doubt. It was not a suggestion, but a question that made her heart skip a beat. The mother nodded. "I'm ready," she said firmly, though a trace of fear and uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. But now that she had taken this step, she couldn't stop. The mother began to realize that the path she had chosen was not just about survival. It was a journey through the shadow, a shadow she could no longer ignore. Jason taught her how to act in situations where laws didn't apply, where there were no rules, she knew. In these rules, there was no room for weakness. She learned to be cautious, to look at people and understand who might be a friend and who might be an enemy. But most importantly, she began to understand that her own strength now lay in her determination. She could no longer be the woman, the mother who simply protects her children. She had to become strong in this new world. "You won't look at the world the same way anymore," Jason said as they returned home late at night. "Those who survive see the world with different eyes." She understood he was right. And though the world was dangerous, it was now her home, and she had to learn to live in it.